So I am just delighted to welcome my friend Leslie Rinchen-Wongmo. I have to always think about that before I say it. Leslie and I are being published by the same publisher, She Writes Press, and we have met many, many times online. I mean, email and Facebook and all of the various ways, Zoom, lots of Zoom calls. But this is the first time I've met her with skin on, and it's been just a delight having her here. And I just want to tell you that you're in for a treat. And Leslie, thank you for being here in Colorado.
Thank you, Joanne. Thanks for your welcome. All right, so I'm going to start by reading a piece from my book. This is Threads of Awakening, an American woman's journey into Tibet's sacred textile art. And the chapters are called Pieces. And the artwork, this is my artwork behind. The artwork is made of pieces of fabric. So I'm going to read piece 32, Hanging Out with Buddhas. Is it true that Western people don't believe in ghosts? Dickie asked between stitches one day. It seemed she'd been pondering this conundrum for some time. I wanted to give her earnest question its due. I took care not to substitute my own opinion for that of all Westerners. Some Westerners believe in ghosts, some don't, I thought. And people can mean very different things when they say they do or don't believe in something like ghosts. Generally, though, our Western culture has positioned science in the space previously occupied by mysticism and religion, even to the point of making science into a religion itself. And science is not very big on ghosts. So no, while there are a variety of viewpoints, I'd have to say, and I did say, most Western people probably don't believe in ghosts. My reply evoked Dickie's deeper question, the one that had been keeping her up at night. If they don't believe in ghosts, she said, then what do they do when they see them? What do we say when we meet phenomena we don't believe in? Can we see them at all? We see what we habituate to. We see what we have a framework for. We see what our beliefs allow. These beliefs are acquired and reinforced by the culture we live in and the company we keep. There's a popular trope that says we're each an average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. Business philosopher Jim Rohn popularized the idea, which has been applied to scales of optimism, health, politics, and income. It's a shorthand way of expressing the powerful, yet often unrecognized influence that our environment and companions have on our beliefs, our outlook, and our results. We can dispute the specifics and the inevitability of the 5 people claim, but there's no doubt we're influenced by our environment and by the thoughts, words, and attitudes that fill it. So what if the 5 people I spend the most time with are Buddhas? That's some powerful positive influence. In the Tsimkang, the sewing workshop where I apprenticed, I was privileged to spend countless hours with Tara, Avalokiteshvara, this is Tara, Manjushri, and other masters of wisdom, compassion, and awareness. Making a tanka is like sharing quiet time with enlightened beings and sages, people who have recognized the true nature of things, people who act out of pure compassion, people who have overcome all negative motivations and reactions. It's like hanging out with the best of my human potential and with the possibility and promise of awakening. We sit together, pass time, and share tea. As I stitch, I become steeped in their fragrance, tinged with their colors. I feel the presence of enlightenment touching me in places words don't reach. All right, so this is white Tara. It's a stitched applique tanka, pieced silk image. And tanka is a Tibetan word that refers to two-dimensional images that roll up, so scroll images, as opposed to wall paintings or sculptures. So it's two-dimensional work that can be rolled up and is portable. And most tankas in Tibet and in the diaspora are paintings that are then framed in brocade fabric. And many of you probably have seen them in Buddhist temples, Dharma centers, maybe some shops in your neighborhood even. But there's another form of tanka that's at least 500 years old, but has always been much rarer, to the point where many Tibetans have not even seen it. And that's the Thangka tradition that I studied and learned in Dharamsala, India. And the difference is, in a painting, like any painting that we know, on canvas, you've got a blank canvas and you put colors on it, right? You make the drawing and then you put the colors on it. This kind of Thangka, instead, there is no background, there's no canvas. They're just pieces of fabric stitched together to create the image. And that's why I also called, well, there are many reasons, but why I titled the chapters of the book Pieces. This is a piece that I made when I was still in my apprenticeship. So the actual Thangkas are generally made with silk, but this is made with cotton and lower quality threads and everything. But why I brought it along is so that you could look at the back to see that there's no background, that the pieces are interconnected and overlapping, connected together only by their relationships. The whole picture is made by the relationship and interconnection of the pieces. And each piece, you can see on this, but you can also see on the finer work. Each piece of silk is outlined with a silk-wrapped horsehair cord. So I take strands of horsehair, hair from the tail of a horse, and wrap them with silk thread to create a kind of piping or cord, and then use that same silk thread to stitch the cord onto the surface of the fabric. Then cut those pieces out, fold the edges under so the cord becomes an outline, and then connect the pieces. So I skipped one part because we started the beginning with a drawing of the whole image, what it's going to be. But that drawing, unlike in a painting, that drawing never actually becomes a part of the finished piece. It's more of a map and a template. So segments of that drawing, pieces of the drawing, I transfer to pieces of fabric and then apply the cords as I described, and then go back to the drawing and use it as a guide to put the pieces together and stitch them and create the whole image. And one of the things that I find moving and a good metaphor is that we also, as a society and as people, we depend on our relationships. We don't exist as individual, independent entities. We exist we exist by the nature of our relationships. And that's an important concept in Buddhism as well, that all of reality, nothing exists all by itself. Everything is comes into existence dependent on its relationships, the absence of it, all of its parts and pieces.
Okay, so why did you write this book and who did you write it for?
Okay. I wrote this book to repay a debt of gratitude to my teachers and to the Tibetans for preserving their amazing, deep and beautiful culture, and then welcoming me into it in a way that was quite surprising. And very early in my apprenticeship, I knew that eventually I would write a book about it. This art form is, at least from the 15th century, goes back at least that far, and it's always been considered a very precious art in Tibet, but there are no books about it. There are many books about Tibetan painting and sculpture, and there have been a few articles about this form, and there have been a few paragraphs in those other books about, they'll write about Thangka paintings and then say, well, there also is this pieced fabric form, but there's never been a book about it in any language. And so I felt like I was in a unique position to be able to do that. But for years, I really preferred making the art over writing about it. So it took me a long time. Finally, it felt like time. And I knew So let me just say, I wanted to have written the book, but I didn't want to write it. I think that's probably pretty common. So I had to kind of trick myself into writing it and put myself back in the time when I was first traveling before I arrived in Dharamsala, India, and met the Tibetans and met this art form. And I used to write letters back about my experience. And people loved those letters. It was before email, and so I had given my mother a mailing list of friends and relatives I wanted to stay in touch with. So I would write the letters and send them to her, and she would hand address envelopes and photocopy the letters and send them out. So it was the early travel blog form. And people said at that time, oh, you should write a book about this. So I actually put myself back in the mindset of writing the letters to get into writing this book. And I started out by writing longhand, and just as if I were, bringing up a memory, and then as if putting myself as if I were back in that situation. And who did I write the book for? Is that what you asked? Yeah. Well, what I've come to realize is the book is of value and interest to two primary groups of people that overlap. People who are interested in textiles, quilting, handwork, and people who are interested in Buddhism or meditation. And I think there's a big overlap between the two. A lot of people who do handwork find it very meditative and then become interested in Buddhism from that. Somebody told me yesterday that they think it's a very good book for people who are new to Buddhism, because I'm not a Dharma teacher, I'm not writing a philosophical treatise, and I'm not an iconographer either. I mean, the artwork has tremendous symbolism, but I'm not an expert on that symbolism. A lot of it is more intuitive for me. But I lived and breathed and continue to live and breathe the Buddhist teachings through my work as well as through study. And so the way that I bring it in, I weave it into the stories, I weave it into talking about the artwork. And so several people have actually told me it's a good introduction to someone, not from a philosophical perspective, but just from talking to a friend kind of perspective.
So what was your religious background before you went on this quest?
I grew up in a mixed household, mixed religion household. My father is a secular Jew, so he came from Jewish background but was not religious. My mother grew up Christian, was very spiritual, and became very interested in meditation and Eastern traditions when I was quite young. So I had this mixed background. I identified as Jewish growing up, but very early on, kind of through my mother's interest in meditation, I think, I actually read Ram Dass, Be Here Now, and The Only Dance There Is, and Grist for the Mill, when I was between 12 and 14 years old.
You were precocious.
And yes, and I really felt, when I read, an Eastern viewpoint, an Eastern philosophical mindset, it just felt like, oh yeah, of course, that's how it is. It wasn't like a conversion experience or anything. It was just like, oh yeah, that's it. That explains what I think, And so that started me on the path. And then when I arrived in Dharamsala and was living with the Tibetans, then I became more interested specifically in Buddhism. But it never felt like a change. It just felt like deepening.
And what was your favorite part of writing this book?
Finishing it. No, but also my favorite is hearing that it touches people. It really is. It's very meaningful to me that it touches people.
What do you hope that people will take away from this book?
several things, but probably primarily, I hope that they will take confidence in their curiosity. I had no idea that I was going to live in India for 9 years, that I was going to learn this rare Buddhist art form, that I was going to feel completely at home in a place I'd never been before, in a culture very different from my own. But I let curiosity guide me, and I said yes. And I didn't know that was unusual, but in talking to people, I have realized that it was kind of unusual, that I was willing to say yes and explore an unconventional path. And so I hope that others, not that they'll go to India, not that they'll learn to make tankas, but that whatever is sparking their curiosity and fascination, that they'll trust it and say yes to it and see what comes.